Thank you very much. Think everybody can hear me? Okay, well, thank you very much. My name is Fred Lopez, and again, I'm with the city of El Paso. And I think today I really wanted to give the story of how El Paso started embracing green infrastructure. And I wanted to tell the story in the framework of that this is relatively new to our city. So for all those folks out there that are thinking, how do we get started? I always say, well, El Paso can do it. There's a lot of other cities can do it. So, just because we might be, years behind Tucson doesn't mean that you can't already embrace a lot of the good things of green infrastructure and know that you can be a city like Tucson or El Paso or other cities. And our case study really is on great streets because we're embracing green infrastructure first through great streets in our capital improvement program. But really, it first started with taking the approach that roads are not just for moving vehicles. As was previously mentioned on another presentation, roads are to accommodate all modes of transportation. So when you start looking at how you develop infrastructure, it's not just movement of vehicles, but it's economic development, roadway safety, but also public health. How can you use roadways to address community health? Our approach in looking at green infrastructure has been really, how does this contribute to neighborhoods? So while we're just at the infancy of looking at water harvesting and other types of stormwater within the roadway, we really first wanted to look at how this could have a positive impact on our neighborhoods. And then lastly, that these projects are supposed to be unique, they're supposed to be fun and really embrace the community and try to solicit community input in these projects. At our city, most of our public works projects were really engineering driven. It was all about the technical design, how was the curb developed, how was the roadway pavement, and then second was maintenance. It was all about how could this be the lowest maintenance dollar cost, and then at the end of that really was looking at stormwater and utilities. And by stormwater, it's the classical design, move the water to the curbs, have the streets carry the water into inlets and onto drainage structures. So what we did is that we wanted to ensure that roadways are being developed with a planning focus. And in that case, you look at those design standards, but not just for traffic movement. It's for the pedestrian, it's for cyclists, it's for mass transit. And second, we've really focused on public outreach to really, from the beginning of the process, go out into neighborhoods and ensure that they have a voice and also have buy-in. And the great thing about when you reach out to residents is that you get a lot of great ideas that you would have never thought of in the office. And then as I mentioned, community health, our city has a very high rate of diabetes and other types of health issues. So how can you introduce street trees and other elements that will really get people out of their homes and using our infrastructure? So our experience was that back in 2011-12, we adopted a new comprehensive plan. And the focus of that comprehensive plan was really to ensure that infrastructure, not just roadways, parks, municipal buildings, all included elements that promoted pedestrian, bicycling, and mass transit. And out of that, what we immediately identified is that we did not have a street tree ordinance. So we like to say in El Paso is that street trees are the most cost-effective ways to really transform a street. And initially, when we used to build a lot of concrete, because that was easiest to maintain over long term, what we found is that projects were a lot cheaper to design when you put in landscaping and irrigation. It was still cheaper than to put all that concrete we were previously looking. Now, yes, long-term maintenance costs, did have an impact because you are having to put in trees and you are having to maintain them and et cetera. But we realized that there's also something you can't measure, which is that economic development, community pride. You can't measure that in dollars, but we knew that immediately when we started putting trees in neighborhoods, people felt better about their environment. They felt much more excited, wanting to get outside, and they were talking about trees. In 2012, we created a transportation planning program, and I headed the program at that time, and our whole emphasis was transforming our streets. And so we utilized these principles, particularly when we adopted a street capital improvement program in 2012. This program, we took the approach of reconstructing several of our roadways in a lot of our inner city areas of the city, and that gave us this great opportunity to go and introduce these elements in those roadways. but also as part of our restriping, our resurfacing, we took every opportunity we could to introduce bike lanes, to introduce street trees and other enhancements, whether it was just narrowing the street, or just looking at anything as part of that project that could introduce green elements. And in continuing with that stride, what we realized is, well, we needed to adopt design standards for these roadways. So in 2013, we adopted those standards, but what we wanted to do is not necessarily take the approach with both the public sector and private sector. What we decided to do is say, we're going to develop these new street design standards, we're going to test them, showcase them with our public works projects, and then in the future, we would then interface with our developers to start talking about transforming our streets for new subdivisions. In 2013, we also adopted an interim bike map because we wanted to ensure that the reconstruction projects that we were focusing on also included bike lanes. And we also adopted median design standards in 2014. This is really our first introduction really into water harvesting within infrastructure. And then we've also really narrowed and done a lot of research on trees and plants for streets that are appropriate for our area. So we're in the Chihuahuan Desert. Our region gets a little bit over 9 inches of rain annually. And so what we did is we did a lot of research looking at Tucson, Phoenix, Albuquerque, but also looking at native trees that are from West Texas that do well in our area, the Guadalupe areas, Trans-Pecos, et cetera. 2014, we created a bicycle advisory committee, and that group really helped us promote the introduction of bicycling. And then right now we are working on a Great Streets Plan and a bicycle plan. The Great Streets Plan is really what's now pulling together the elements of water harvesting, elements of just really locking in using native vegetation in all cases. So that program is undergoing right now, and we're really excited because it now is going to be a document that the City Council will adopt that we will utilize for all of our streets. Also in El Paso, we have a tree farm. And so what we are doing with this tree farm is we are reprogramming the inventory of trees for future street CIP projects, and also for medians, parks, and other types of projects. So this year, for example, due to roadway reconstruction, we've planted 1,044 trees just due to those street CIP projects, and 323 of those have been in downtown. And in addition, we now have 752 trees that we're going to harvest for additional projects. So really in the infancy of our program, this was a typical roadway that was reconstructed in El Paso. And you can see elements that were introduced. Well, let's keep the lanes relatively narrow. The old model was 12-foot, 11-foot lanes. Now they're 10. Well, let's make sure there's a parking lane to slow down traffic. Well, let's make sure we have a pedestrian realm with some trees. But as you notice, this is still a roadway that's built for the automobile. So in this time period, and this is in 2010, we realized we still had a lot of work to do on how we designed roadways. Our arterials had walls that were facing them. So essentially you were creating this tunnel. Our regulations did not require subdividers to put in street trees or do any type of other enhancements other than building the roadway, the asphalt, the concrete. So we knew we had challenges in our comprehensive plan in our street trees. First thing we showed, street trees will transform a roadway. And then over time, as you change your development regulations to focus, instead of having a wall, you have houses fronting, you have on-street parking. All those elements can go in to slow down traffic, to make streets much more livable, much more exciting. As I mentioned, in 2010, this was the model. So this is a traffic calming project. Great intention, it's narrowing the roadway, but you can see what was happening is that let's put in concrete. There was no attention to vegetation, to trees. So we spent a lot of money putting in concrete. And in fact, we would dye it different colors and try all these sorts of things. But really, as a planner, we would look at how did this really contribute to the neighborhood? How was this really helping just promote any type of good design? This was another traffic calming project. A lot of concrete. You even had a decorative stamp and all this other sorts of stuff. But look at what the attention was being paid to. It was being paid toward drainage. Our streets in this area in particular would carry the water to the curbs. So our engineers were saying, well, we have to leave out areas so that water can keep moving. So rather than looking for opportunities for water harvesting and other elements, it was the quick engineering decision to keep that water moving onto its inlet. Here's another example. So what we started doing is when we started the transportation planning program is we said we can't use concrete as a default anymore. So we started looking at native trees, desert landscaping, other elements that started introducing these type of vegetation into our medians. So this was a roadway that was a typical wide arterial. We put in medians in the middle and added a bike lane. And just through those type of enhancements, it allowed us to start putting in vegetation and trees. This is another project. It was the same situation. We added a bike lane and landscaping. At the time, our council had a big push to start putting in roundabouts as traffic calming measures. So what would have just been the typical small sage plants or other basic enhancements, we started adding trees, we started adding other features. This is a pocket park near our downtown area. And so you can see that what would have just been focus on the interior, we started adding street trees and a lot more emphasis on desert and native vegetation. Our downtown, very historic, was platted in the 1800s, but surprisingly, the tree canopy that existed back then was removed in the 1950s when a traffic engineer decided to expand a lot of the roadways. So what was originally very wide sidewalks, tree canopy was removed to enhance a lot of these roadways. So what we've started doing, and a lot of it's been a combination of our MPO assisting us with going after transportation alternative funding, is to go in and remove these old types of right turn lanes and very narrow sidewalks and start installing street trees, widening sidewalks for pedestrians. This is another shot where, I mean, these were extremely narrow sidewalks. Our convention center is on the left-hand side. We now have a ballpark that was just built on the street. We have our art museum, our history museum, but yet the sidewalks that were leading to those were not really conducive to an urban environment. So we went in and added street trees to all these. So this is now Santa Fe today. About a year and a half ago, there were no trees on this roadway. And this is part of the 323 trees we developed. Also, we took old parking lots and other areas that were just asphalt and introduced other walkways. This is a pedestrian pathway project that linked two areas of our downtown together. But a big part of that was installing Texas red oaks, mesquites, oaks, and other types of trees that are very conducive to the El Paso region. This is a shot of our new ballpark that was built, and the great thing is there was now a really big focus for enhancing the pedestrian realm. This is after you exit Interstate 10 and enter downtown, this is the first location. So what our city council said is, well, we don't even want the smaller trees that you all used to put. We want very large trees. So in this case, we actually brought in very large trees. They were so large that we actually couldn't fit them in the existing tree wells. We had to do kind of a weird modification in order to install them. But interestingly enough, we're looking at taking out all this concrete now and doing a landscape area and trying to introduce some water harvesting elements here because they exist on the other side of the street where we created a pedestrian plaza. And between the ballpark and and another neighborhood, what was going to be an area that was just turned into this kind of a vacant alley, we introduced a concept that's used in Europe called a VUNERF, where a roadway is built that can simultaneously have pedestrians and vehicles use it at the same time. And it's been a very successful project, and we've gotten a lot of support from it, and we're looking at introducing this concept in some other areas in downtown. So now, because our council has really embraced trees, this was a reconstruction of a bridge. We have the railroads that go a level below our downtown streets. So there was a bridge that existed right here. It was reconstructed, but as part of that project, street trees were installed. This is a project now where we're starting to introduce water harvesting. This is Country Club, which is in the river valley. And you can see these are the features that we started introducing now to move water off the roadway and into our parkways. So we install street trees. There's a swale in the parkway. And so this is really our first attempt at really introducing these concepts to our arterials. This was formerly a 4-lane roadway and 2 lanes in some areas. Now it's a 3-lane roadway with a center turn lane, a parkway. And what's at the edge of the streets is a 7-foot kind of a multi-purpose trail that is utilized. So it was really a street that was not conducive at all for walking, cycling, now is a very heavily used roadway. This is a roundabout on that same roadway where we're trying a lot of desert plants. So this was kind of our palette to try a lot of different plants. We're really focusing on plants that flower, a lot of sages, a lot of other types of plants that really do well in our region. So this is the attempt to use this as an opportunity. There's also a slight depression here as well, so we're working on elements that will introduce kind of water harvesting elements. And here is another shot of just us really utilizing different types of desert plants. So in projects that we're reconstructing right now, you can see here where we're really focusing within the parkway to introduce landscaping, introduce hike and bike trails or multi-purpose trails on what were previously very wide roadways. And this is another shot. These are different projects, but you can see the attention that's going in. This is Robinson. So this is next to an arroyo that exists near our downtown. It's a wide area that tends to wash out heavily during our monsoon season. And this is one of those reconstruction projects where we're going to use this entire area, not to add a lane. We're going to keep this roadway very narrow, but we're going to use this as an opportunity to do water harvesting, to also filter water that does go into the arroyo. And we're going to install a multi-purpose trail and street trees, primarily the thornless honey mesquite. And this is another shot. These are some of our median projects that we've introduced where these were just formerly areas that would typically just be left as dirt. We've gone in and we've put in some water harvesting, but really the focus has been on desert plants. I wanted to just touch briefly on our public outreach. This is a project where you have a rural road near the Rio Grande, and there's a very wide easement area that really creates a great opportunity to put a hike and bike trail or other neighborhood feature. So we are right now working on different types of plans in order to create a nice hike and bike trail, introduce plants that do well in our river valley. But I wanted to highlight the outreach we did because we went, before we started any of the plans, had a neighborhood meeting where we had over 100 people attend and asked them simple questions like, what type of crosswalk designs do you like? And we used electronic polling devices to really gauge their input. And so every time now that we have a meeting, and there's some neighborhoods that are on different sides of what type of amenities to put in, we always go back and point to this report that yes, although you may want some specific item or you may not like this, your neighborhood, your residents by a vote of X percentage wanted this element. We even looked at traffic circles, at different intersections, and you can see how, I mean, in this case, the neighborhood, I mean, it was still in the 60 to 40 range, but still it's a relatively close margin. So we spent a lot more time analyzing this particular issue. Did you want parallel parking lanes or no parking lanes to slow down traffic? And this is really a debate of keeping the roadways narrow in rural areas in El Paso. And so the neighborhood here said 75% wanted parallel parking. So that was good for us to know because it does create a much wider roadway because you have to accommodate those parking lanes. But in the end, when you do have parking, it does slow down traffic. Did the residents want a shared use path or a sidewalk? And we got feedback that 93% wanted that shared use path. These are becoming extremely popular in El Paso. It's asphalt trail, very easy for us to put in. And we have just a lot of usage at those facilities. In our early days where we were putting in street trees and there were some of our city departments that didn't necessarily support the dramatic increase in trees due to maintenance, what we would do is consistently poll neighborhoods and say, do you want street trees in your projects? this case 93%. So this really helped us internally to go back to our departments that did maintenance to say, neighborhoods want this. They really want this. And we made sure to articulate that these are very low water usage irrigation systems. We made sure to articulate to them that these were native plants. We worked a lot with our water utilities to ensure that the plans that we had long-term to put in more trees would not affect dramatically water usage in our community. And we also talked to our maintenance departments because they were primarily going in every season and really butchering the plants. And we wanted to promote that desert plants need to be allowed to grow and they need to be natural, not shaped in a circle. And our trees shouldn't just be pruned at 8 feet just for the clearance and then you leave this little crown at the top. We spend a lot of time, you prune them, very specialized when they're just starting out so that they grow into a proper canopy. We asked residents, well, what type of landscaping? Do you want it formal? Do you want it informal, more desert-like? In this case, we got very valuable input that informal vegetation was what residents wanted. And this allowed us also through our CIP to start introducing buffered bike lanes. So like Tucson, we've now started looking at buffered bike lanes, protected lanes, and our capital improvement program gives us that tool to do it. Because if we're going to go in and reconstruct a roadway, to really add the paint, to add barriers, protected structures, when you look at it overall in the cost of a project, it's not that large of a cost. And we spend a lot of time to make sure that the bike lanes are large enough that the old model of 4 feet is not a, if you think of yourself as a cyclist, you're on there, do you really feel comfortable in the 4-foot area with cars passing next to you? No. In reality, maybe you need 6 feet, 6.5 feet, plus a 3-foot buffer to really feel comfortable. And this is really us looking at connectivity from a pedestrian, cycling, and mass transit ability. So that concludes my presentation. And thanks again for inviting us out here to this forum.